let's hit him with the DBs.
Let's do just that. And I do see your question in the chat there, Marco, about Geno Stone. And honestly, we'll answer it right at the top of the defensive back segment. Let's just go right into that. Why not? So he's asking right now, as we head into defensive backs, should he hold on to Geno Stone? This is the Ravens safety we were talking about, filling in for Marcus Williams, really. He's logged 100% snaps in the last 3 weeks. He was always been really a near every down player in his absence. And 6 tackles or more in 3 of the last 4 games. Obviously, a total dud this past week against the Saints. Well, not this past week, but 2 weeks ago. I'm willing to hold him. As long as Marcus Williams is out there, I think he's a fine start as a guy who's getting 6 tackles almost every single week. And while that didn't happen against the Saints, because I think Geno Stone has that volatility. We talked about that when we mentioned him initially as a waiver wire pickup, a guy that has coverage skills, so he's dropping deep. So you're getting these 6 tackle games, and they're great, but 1 to 2 tackle floors are very real for him. So he has Carolina coming up, and I do like that matchup as an opportunity for him to get a turnover, for him to make a few plays. I'm willing to play Geno Stone at least one more week, especially as long as Marcus Williams is sidelined. Oh, I think you're muted, or I can't hear you, Axton.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. He's been a serviceable replacement, and I think it's worth holding on to for one more week. We're not just going to totally count him out for one more dud, especially with the likely explanation for maybe the lack in production. So might hold on to him for one more week if he's not going to give you much more production than that. Doesn't Marcus Williams come back in a short couple of weeks or so, or is he done for the remainder of the season?
Honestly, I had to double check that. I'll check that as a. Do you want to grab one of the names on the list? I'll fact check the. Marcus Williams is expected to return. I'm not exactly sure when that will happen. Either way, I do know that Geno Stone has been very impressive in this stint that he's played. Obviously, Marcus Williams will be the guy when he comes back. They paid him to be, and he is that good of a player. John Harbaugh expects Williams to be back next month while they're pushing for that playoffs. That was a report as of November 12th. So we're at the very least, maybe he's back for playoffs. And either way, we're trying to get to playoffs right now. So still plenty of run time for Geno Stones, in my opinion.
I agree entirely.
All right, let's jump on over to the defensive backs then on a general sense. Last week, I brought up Kareem Jackson as somebody that was filling in for that, just the last minute standing of these Denver safeties. He had 5 tackles in the pass defense, kind of a middling day, okay day. Brought up Dane Belton as the Xavier McKinney pickup, 4 tackles, interception, pass deflection, really nice interception as well by Dane Belton. And he's going to play deep just like McKinney does. So these, he saved that day kind of with that interception. And, sometimes his floor is 4 tackles and stat sheet, so he could have, or his floor could even be 3 tackles. So you just play it with ear. He has some good weeks, and some good weeks will be ahead of him. Kirby Joseph, we mentioned, who had 7 tackles as well as 5 solo. He had a good week himself, and he is playing that every down role. He has played very well for this Lions team. And Eric Rowe, we brought up in Miami, only had 1 tackle and 50 snaps. I am now taking I don't care about the Miami safety situation, and I refuse to play the guessing game.
I don't know if anybody else can hear you, but I can't. We got some technical difficulties, but that's okay. I think Mike I'll kind of take it until Mike can figure out his stuff here.
I think we're back here. We think we're back. Okay.
You were talking about being out on all the Miami Dolphins.
Yes, I am talking about not being willing to play that roulette wheel. And welcome, Sebastian, to the chat. I do see that question about Mike Williams. Let's get to that right after the defensive back segment, right at the top. But let's get into that. So we mentioned who we talked about last week. Let's talk about who we're talking about this week. PJ Williams is somebody I am incredibly excited about for this week. And he filled in incredibly well last week for Marcus May. As long as Marcus May is out, he suffered an abdomen injury last week. I believe it was in practice. PJ Williams should be in your lineup. He's played 100% of snaps. We talked about the absence of Pete Warner last week, obviously, and we talked about it before with Caden Ellis when I mentioned him last week, if you picked up either. But it increases the need to drop a safety in because backup linebackers are not the greatest players anyway. So you have some range there with either Tyrann Mathieu or PJ Williams. And PJ Williams is the guy that got that role. He had a lot of tackles last week. A whopping 11 tackles, and he faces the Rams. And I'm going to mention it every single time I mention the Rams. The Rams have been nothing but unimpressive this year. You take Cooper Kupp away from it too, and all of a sudden it's this is a bad offense. It might have been a bad offense with Cooper Kupp. Now you take away Cooper Kupp. And I'm not willing to play that game right now. So I like PJ Williams as a almost must start. As long as Marcus May is not in.
Yeah, absolutely. And this Rams offense is really just kind of falling apart, it seems like. I know Stafford is still dealing with his injury that's kind of been week to week. And with Cooper Kupp out, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for these defensive backs to get in there and make things happen and take advantage of some mistakes. Up next, we had Xavier Woods on here for Dallas Cowboys safety. We brought him up in the past.
Carolina. You're thinking of.
Excuse me.
There's another Woods. No, you're good.
Yeah. Sorry about that. We didn't have it labeled here. That's my fault. Carolina. Anyways, we brought him up in the past. He's somebody that's kind of been serviceable. He's managed to create himself a decent tackle floor, getting 5, 7, 8 tackle weeks throughout the year so far. He's still widely available in a lot of your leagues and still going to remain a serviceable fill-in to get you through these weeks, try to get you through into the playoffs. Who do they play now? The Carolina Panthers.
The Panthers, oh god, we just said before, right? It was we talked about Geno Stone. So they play the Ravens this week. And if we know anything about the Ravens, they can stay on the field offensively. And honestly, there haven't been too many chunk plays allowed. So what that means is longer time possession, which means more tackle opportunities for Xavier Woods. It's just not a team that's ripping off 70-yard plays right now because of the lack of playmakers they have as receivers. So I like Xavier Woods as well this week. Another name I'll throw out there on the same level of that Saints thing. Paulson Adebo has been so bad this year, but so good for fantasy. And I'm willing to chase that to the bank because he's being targeted like crazy. He gets tackles like crazy. This past week wasn't exactly that for the tackle floor, but in the past week it has been. And again, I mentioned the same thing with PJ Williams. He faces the Rams this week in terms of Paulson Adebo. This is the Rams that can't move the ball, are turning the ball over, and honestly, I think Stafford's going to really struggle this week. I think Stafford's going to be I think you can play the Saints defense if you're playing a DST this week. So I think Paulson Adebo could be a really strong play this week. Somebody that's going to get plenty of tackles as the Rams play catch up, and I'm all in on it.
Yeah, you pretty well hit it. This Rams offense is really just it's really struggling. So and it's kind of funny how fantasy IDP works whenever you have a bad defender who is, in terms of technical football and actually playing his position, is terrible at it, can actually prove to be worthy fantasy wise, just for the simple fact, as you mentioned, that bad players tend to get targeted a lot. So the guys that are involved in all the high value plays, and if they can luck out and wrap up some shoestring tackles or get a couple of deflections here or there, can really yield fantasy value. So kind of like an Alex Singleton, just because he's mainly involved in a ton of the plays and he's just kind of there, he just kind of lucks into production. Now that's obviously changed with everything that's been going on, but just another example.
Yeah, Alex Singleton's actually an interesting name, and honestly, I could have brought it up with the linebacker. Weird switch in Denver this week for anybody that was tracking it. Obviously, Josie Jewell got the snaps, but that linebacker 2 role that has been dominated by Jonas Griffith this year, Alex Singleton out-snapped him this past week and filled up the stat sheet regardless. He had like 8 tackles on 50% of snaps, which for all we bettors out there that had the over-under of 9.5 that we felt confident on, it was a weird week to see the switch. We got a little bit sweating there. But listen, he got a lot of work, and honestly, if he is on your wire as well, if he's going to have that linebacker 2 role at the tackle rate that Alex Singleton gets, he could be very valuable as well. We didn't mention him because he's more higher owned and typically he's roster, but he's someone to keep an eye out just in case. Now let's